phone. Laptop. I had never made use of them, though, the berm trails, prior to that last spring, despite that every day, over the preceding 5 years, except only my 9 total months of incarceration, and another 20 days besides that, maybe, 20 sporadic days besides that, maybe, scattered individually here and there during that interval throughout. Every day I walked each of my many dogs around the figure-8 trace of my niche little nook section of Lake Holiday, and amidst the Lake Holiday traffic that could at times be tumultuous. The berm's seclusion was foreboding, though, and too easily given unto malevolent manipulation and my framing for some hideous crime. The isolation of the berms being favorable to furtive fabrication by the same faceless prerogative that has me still encased in this ice-block prison, and has since that night in which I was bound by snow, years prior to even this day of my current reference, walking with my dog around the berm's elevated edges. But the troops of traveling patrol that they had cycled around me for years by then, which prophetic promise of bands put upon and set forth around, was fulfilled before my eyes every time I left the house, and still is. In which bands had started out subtle, had, by that time, become blatant, obstructive, burdensome, and unbearable. And insomuch that I could hardly any more even feign earnest greeting or interaction with the neighbors that lived in the houses lining the large oblong asphalt figure-8, around which, for so long prior, I traversed with my daily dog walks, mostly at night, houses in unbroken looping string, and woe unto you who join house to house. And as I once would walk my wheels around them at opportune times, if during a weekend afternoon, for example, and other dates of dense travel along Lake Holiday's private roads, they would concentrate in sensing scent at vulnerable points along the route, and focus on them too, sharp, seizing tones at precarious places, but to make my dogs frantic and unwieldy on the leash, as, at the same time, their harassing bands of drivers were synchronized to rush their vehicles speeding through, and mere feet from the, I ought not embellish by signifying shoulder, but the thin gravel strip of surface, which ran parallel along both sides of the road, and served as such, and mediate between the blacktop and the grass of the adjacent ditches, where my dogs and I would walk, and would be walking, as there are no sidewalks along the roads of Lake Holiday. In that the subdivision primarily is a vacation retreat spot. A lake surrounded by million-dollar homes, surrounded by 2 winding mazes, Sandwich Side and Somonauk, of more affordable homes, built as buffer between the million-dollar homes and the world outside the private community, and as no one wants to summer alone, where no people are. And so, though, at Lake Holiday's conception, sidewalks were seen, no doubt, as an unnecessary expense, insomuch that they would so hardly be ever utilized by professionally successful couples, now with young families spending a dozen weekends a year at their summer homes, by those Lake Holiday was made for. But so to arouse my indignation towards my dogs, my beloved best friends whose behavior would suddenly betray all restraint and respect and conduct in the close chaos of cars zipping around sharp curves, or else to instigate some sad accident to bereave me, and woe unto them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin, as it were, with cart rope. And insomuch more so that these same neighbors could hardly any longer bear to patiently observe the protocol that, by agreement or instruction, they were all obligated to maintain around me, that their collective strained composure eventually became obvious. I was finally coaxed to overcome my caution and my legitimate cause for paranoid concern, and I spent that second spring out of prison, and the first fully again legally free, having finished parole that previous August, daily enjoying the berm's unspoiled charm. I just kept strictly to daylight hours. I know now, however, that their escalated antagonism on the Lake Holiday roads without sidewalks that it was meant specifically to persuade me onto the berm's path. And this current conjecture has departed well beyond the scope of our long premise prior to its point on two, and presumes little besides indirect and circumstantial connection to the exacerbated thesis of this long racial indictment, so I shall about it briefly from here, but that I recounted it and had to make the reader aware of things there are to fear. Thusly, let me but pose a question. And ask if it's a normal thing to behold an earthworm, a sightless night-crawler earthworm, which one finds everywhere, scattering paved surfaces after a summer rain, or might wrap around a hook and use for fish bait. An earthworm of the dark dirt. Is it normal to behold an earthworm protrude out of its little hole in the ground like a serpent, a fine stomach contour control, and then react as though it were intruded upon by a figure that it can observe and knows more so knows to fear, so that it responds as though it were startled and like a turtle, only quicker, but that it withdraws itself fast away from danger by retracting its body back into the void orifice out of which it presently protruded? Does it? Does that strike one as ordinary earthworm behavior to behold? For that the berm's vertical bell curve shaped rampart rims rise at some spots even higher still up a slope of earthwork platform that's already elevated above the berm floor, and then at other spots it descends. And one summer day, I apparently went the wrong way and approached the earthworm from the direction opposite that I was anticipating. At the berm's northwesternmost corner, there's a steep little incline in which the path climbs maybe 3 feet or more within just longer than a yard span. I drew towards it westbound, to be then moving south after turning left and ascending at the corner. The earthworm was poking its tip just over the vertical horizon limit of the small ascension, trying to discern who might be heading eastward towards its direction down the aisle brimmed by very tall grasses, when from behind it I encroached. The protruding earthworm wasn't very far below the angle of eye level from a little bit away, jutting its view just over the height. I noticed as I started up the little climb, I was already standing hunched over, marveling down curiously upon it, but distinctly blocking out the bright afternoon sunlight that shined just prior upon its place. Yet still a clear moment delay before the worm cognated either the light that it suddenly lacked or the temperature that, for my interception, the sun was no longer imposing. And by the time that it pointed up at me, presumably its monotreme orifice, as though it might squirt at me out of it, but within which mouth cavity, apparently, the earthworm has instead adapted optic organ, insomuch that in the same small but unmistakable flash lapse, that it might take you or I to comprehend what our eyes had just unexpectedly lighted upon, and then how we might also so easily betray discretion if what we watched for now suddenly confronts us, so too the earthworm portrayed its delayed but distinct wherewithal, in a moment aware now of my whereabouts above it, before it exhibited then its excitable susceptibility for surprise, along with an instinctual endowment, unanimous across zoology, unto satirical exaggeration, abruptly sucking itself in violently in an instant back down into its hole. suggesting to me that the earthworm was watching the other way, well beyond its immediate reference, that its perception of vantage was still bright afar off, was not rendered darker by shadow my head's radius around it. This, sometimes when I look away, this camera does a skip, like a stutter. You guys, my oppressors still own me. Would that seem strange to behold, though? And so if, therefore, the worm's fight or flight impulse and its sudden terrified sensitivity to visual stimulus seems spurious and unnatural to the simple soil squirmer, if it's reasonable that I saw some sick, abominable periscope, as it did move and was alive, and not stiff like dead taxidermy, then perhaps you conclude as I do, that something's hidden there from view, that there the people move around through secret tunnels underground, that dire things beneath the clay make their secret passageway. And if they should in fact wield such unrestricted access underneath, is it likely that they would cease at the berm's borders, at the berm's boundaries, and tunnel no further, and under nowhere and nothing and no one else? Is that how man has so always shown himself? Prudent? Restrained? Within a month of that, they hauled my ass off to the booby hatch, the loony bin, for a few days under, let's just say, conspicuous circumstances. It was just as well, though, and I instigated that episode, the other, when I was taken away. And I was going and would be gone regardless after that July day that they hauled me off, one way or the other. I just didn't expect such their maneuver. Yet I was approaching, if I hadn't already headlong arrived at, some clinical retrograde physiology resembling attributes between anemia and anorexia, and so, just to more fully disclose, I was on the verge of nervous breakdown anyway. But again, though, only if otherwise I was not clinically already there. For they cooked me for way too long, and for way too long was isolated, while in the middle located, the captive center of a cyclone, in the tension of a war zone, a strange carnival of war game tactic, and living in a funhouse, exploiting the principles of Gestalt psychology, manipulating subtle measurements, shaving unperceivable inches off this side of a length of wall, skewing the angle of that side a few minute degrees over the same span to conceal crawl-space crevice between drywall sheets, where creepers within the walls kept watchful surveillance while endeavoring to avoid detection from watchers without, but without, notwithstanding, errantly betraying perception of deceptive room dimension. Yeah, Lake Holiday, and that whole 5-year trauma, and all that lamentable lifetime of mine around that lake leading up to it, that's all another genre altogether, and a different dark chapter. That the prior short little earthworm memories is but a peanut shard on a shit Sunday of quiet macabre. But hearken now, ponder too. People, and those that search the wall for script, and those for seeing ill-equipped, I'm shouting now, imploring too, get a goddamn fucking clue. You have no concept, unless you do, what sickness slithers under you. And go to Salmonach, and go and take a look and see, and make a liar out of me. But otherwise, howbeit, please, and feel free, you brain-dead fucking morons, just squander all your hope away. Keep playing Xbox through the day. But here again, here I beg forgive, and it's my problem, I guess, and I'll deal with it.